Hello, thanks for joining in. I'm going to open with a small piece of good news in the context of the broader bad news that the Trump administration is stopping hospitals giving their data to the CDC anymore. So the CDC is no longer showing data on hospitalizations, on numbers of beds left in various states around the US. It's not updating people. It's making it really blatant that the Trump administration is an authoritarian government. Not entirely successful in all avenues, but it's not very useful anymore to keep saying, oh, it's an aspirationally authoritarian government. It just is an authoritarian government, and incompetence and negligence, death by negligence, is often a feature of totalitarian governments. They rule through appeal to emotion, through appeal to machismo, hypermasculine Jungian stereotypes, to gratify people's yearnings for more openly self-interested governance. When people have forgotten the ebbs and flows across history that result in Germany first or America first actually counterintuitively to some people, resulting in a whole heap of destruction. Hi, Tinker, Persian Chick, etc. Nice to see you. So this statistic I'm putting up, first of all, if you can see it, is a fact that often gets talked about without any supporting data. People anecdotally will tell you that their obdurate father, that their stubborn relative was a Republican but has now joined the independents or has joined the Republican Party because they're so revolted with the behavior of Republicans. But it hasn't really been reflected in statistics which accumulate a whole heap of data points and find out Americans' party affiliation. But here, if we look at this graph, it shows that there were slightly more leaning Republicans and Republicans, even as late as January of this year and February of this year, crossed over sometime between February and March, and you now have an increasingly large percentage of Americans who are affiliated to the Democratic Party or who will tell pollsters that they lean Democratic. So that's up to 50 for the blue line and down to 39 for Republican. And it means all of that Trump rhetoric about shy Trump voters or Trump voters who won't disclose that they support Trump, it's a fabrication meant to facilitate and conceal electoral fraud on the part of Trump and the Republican Party. So we still have to be extremely vigilant and active in trying to counter that, in trying to form teams of people who can meet these threats to humanity and threats to America with a resolve to be employed as a poll watcher, to support the United States Postal Service, to do other things to safeguard the outcome of the American election, to safeguard the integrity of American votes. So we have some conversation off to the side about people getting ready for their gym session. Nice. I'm going to share now a little bit of a Trevor Noah skit in which they pay tribute to preemptive celebrations of reopening American states. So let's have a little bit of a look at that.
Right, Texas got it right. And guess what? Now it's time for all the states to follow their lead.
Governor DeSantis now looks like a genius.
Ron DeSantis of Florida, the governor, doing a fantastic job in Florida.
Governor, those dire predictions have not come true.
They look to Florida and they look at Texas that have reopened, and it hasn't led to a massive second wave.
In a very real sense,
Florida's leading the way.
It's been 2 months, and Florida has figured out how to manage this pretty effectively.
Governor DeSantis was doing a phenomenal job. The state of Florida, which happens to be my great home state.
I can't get to Florida or Texas fast enough. And I think there's plenty of people thinking the exact same way.
How much longer are you going to keep me out of your state? I would like to go visit. When am I allowed back in?
We're glad you're opening up. We're ready to have some sunshine and get out of the house.
It's great to be in Florida, and I'm going to be back here in a week.
And I've always wanted to move to Texas. Now I think I have to.
Governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, he knows what he's doing. He's a great governor.
Governor Greg Abbott, we can learn a lot from you and a lot from Governor DeSantis, but we can also learn a lot from Governor Cuomo and Governor Murphy what not to do because they did the opposite of what you guys did.
Texas, Florida gave us clues. Take the success clues.
The successes of Florida, Texas, the failures of New York, New Jersey.
We got to get the whole country open like Tennessee and Texas and Florida.
He's got it in great shape. Texas, Florida's doing very well.
How did you do it? Because we need to learn as we reopen. Great job down there.
Keep up the great work.
You did a great job. You saved a lot of lives, and there's a lot to learn from your success.
There we go. So that was Fox News and cheeky 80s background music imposed by Trevor Noah, highlighting the incongruity of celebrating what was essentially an invitation to mass death and harm, broad harm to people with ongoing organ damage, sabotage to quality of life, etc. I did note somebody making the point that a lot of the people at risk in nursing homes and veteran nursing homes are people who were obliged to go to war, who sacrificed some of their youth and their psychological health, who saw their friends died because they were conscripted into wars to fight to preserve America and to preserve the free world. And those people are now having an average of 13 years lost from their lives, in no small part because the government, the federal government, the Trump federal government is acting in a way that is antithetical to the interests of public health and antithetical or opposed to appropriate governance. Yes, they have an authoritarian government now. They're hiding data from Americans. And that's what happens in authoritarian regimes. It's what happened in communist China under Chairman Mao with the Great Leap Forward, when they changed agricultural practices, diverted work from agriculture industries to industrial steel manufacture in order to look good on the face of things to the rest of the industrialized world and to show off how wonderful China was. And they hid information from the public and even from Chairman Mao himself about the famine. Famines happen under either totalitarian regimes or tyrannical colonialist regimes where human life means nothing, the ego of the leader and his facilitators mean everything. So a lot of people, how many millions? 8 million people died in Bengal, in India, during World War II, because Winston Churchill diverted their agricultural produce to Europe to feed soldiers, or to be in storage to feed soldiers potentially, or in storage to potentially feed British people. Supplies they didn't even need, surplus supplies, but diverted away from the actual population that had grown the crops, that needed the crops, and that starved en masse, or the people who survived lived through that great trauma of seeing many people die and people live in those kind of conditions, which often leads to an erosion of social cohesion and an erosion of ethics, because your ethics do change when you're in a life or death circumstance. Is there matchmaking happening in the comment section? Interesting if it is. Good luck to everyone. Good luck. I'll share some more things. No, just people collaborating. Collaboration is good. because we do need to get more efficient. Those who do not love war must organize for peace. And that's the situation in which we find ourselves. And in this case, peace means safety from a pretty deadly pandemic. And it's not deadly for everyone, but if you're not at risk of getting it, then you're at risk of being a vector for transmitting it. And that's not a happy place to be in, to occupy a link in the chain of transmission involved in bringing death to other people. So we are a function of the ideas we discuss. And if we only talk about protecting ourselves, then those are the only considerations that loom large in people's minds. So we're trying to talk about protecting other people, but there's not a strong system of messaging coming from the top, because the messaging that comes from the White House is a self-protective message for Trump to preserve whatever narrative he thinks will advance his electoral standing, or whatever he and Putin and any of his other confidants think will improve Trump's statistical likelihood of plausibly winning the election. Because they'll cheat and they'll try and manipulate electoral results, and they'll hack electronic voting machines, and they'll sabotage the post office, which they're doing now. They've cut overtime hours to create a backlog of work to undermine people's use of the postal service, people's trust of the postal service, etc. Oh, look, Hope Hicks is trending, presumably because it's being rumored that she slept with Pascal, and that's why Trump fired him as campaign manager. It's a rumor. This is less rumorish. This is the polling average with 110 votes until election day. 2020, Biden has a lead of an average 9 points. Clinton had a lead of 1.1 points. So this is different. This is different. People didn't take a despot seriously. They thought Donald Trump was a joke. And people didn't weight the polls enough for educational level. And there was a very strong backlash against education, because anti-intellectualism is much more potent when compounded with sexism. People are much more afraid of uppity women who get jobs in a zero-sum view of the world, in which if somebody gets something, that means they've taken it from you, as opposed to educated women actually increase the prosperousness of a society. Zero-sum worldviews are very, very destructive of social cohesion. Migrants don't take jobs from Americans. Migrants create successful enterprises and lift educational standards. And like any demographic, have some members who commit crimes or don't contribute or are present in the unemployment statistics, etc. But exploitative racists like Trump will take people's suspicions and people's problematic interpretations of facts, inadequate and irrational interpretation of facts, and twist it to cater to and amplify hatred. Hatred that doesn't just hurt migrants, doesn't just hurt Black Americans, also takes as collateral damage lives all across the US. Oh, I replied to this post with a post I made myself, in which I added who won and who lost. So Clinton lost with a 1.1 point advantage. Obama won. Kerry lost. Bush won. Clinton won. Reagan won. So it looks like you can lose with a 4-point advantage, but it's unusual. Nobody seems to have lost with a advantage over 10 points. But yes, this is a huge difference between 2016 and now, that Trump presidency was a rhetorical concept then. Oh, he's a good businessman, let's try him out. Even though confirmation bias is a very prevalent and very strong principle guiding people's opinions and voting tendencies, death and widespread death does have the ability to impact the votes and the worldviews of those who are less firmly attached. The weak Trump supporters, they're getting peeled off because people are afraid for their lives. And there's a lot of data points that increasingly contradict Trump and Trump's policy of inaction and Trump's policy of counterproductive action on the coronavirus front. All right. This is about the CDC website. Let's have a little look. So the state representative estimates for percentage of inpatient beds occupied by COVID-19 patients was at some point giving the message, this content isn't available. So I think it's now been updated with the data that I had on the 14th of July, but not updated with fresh data. So I guess they didn't like the blank screen. That was going to be too alarming for people. I think it's updated. But yes, you do pay for these services with your tax dollars, and it does underline that the Trump regime is authoritarian, that it believes in obfuscating, blocking, or distorting data, has a problem with science, ethics, and truth, and that indeed this is paid for in American lives and livelihoods and in American longevity as well. And someone draws a parallel to Chernobyl, where the Russian government lied about what was happening, which caused a significant increase in the number of dead people and harmed people. People with pregnancies, miscarriages, birth defects, death down the track, etc. Yep, so this is the point I was mentioning earlier. Famines only happen in non-democracies because only non-democracies are able to hide and ignore the dying and the dead. And the Trump administration is going to give it a red hot try with COVID-19. Let's see what Nancy Pelosi has to say about it.
Observing his behavior, I have concluded that he is like the man who refuses to ask for directions. Observing his behavior,
like a man who refuses to ask for directions. Seth Abramson's got a suggestion of how Trump might attempt to rig the election, hide COVID data, not really going to work, make mail-in voting impossible for many voters. They have some strategies for that. The new head of the United States Postal Service has cut overtime for postal workers, ostensibly to save money, but fairly easy to conclude that they don't want the United Postal Service to be operational by November because mail-in voting impedes a lot of Republican voter suppressive efforts. Spread disinformation via social media. Yes, the QAnon cult festers apace. I'm convinced there's both foreign and domestic bad actors interfering in public health safety measure compliance because they keep sharing misinformation to deter people from getting vaccinated down the track or from wearing masks now, etc. To solicit and receive illegal foreign aid. Yep, we already know Trump announced he was fine with that. And if all else fails, provoke a new crisis to distract voters. Yes, they're going to try and substantially reduce the number of polling places so that in-person voting is, again, an absolute nightmare for non-white Americans. There's a lot of work to do. But I think white voters are also, by November, likely to reject a government that has overseen a massively under-responded to pandemic and a loss of employment that equals the Great Depression. A GOP Texas plank calls for the state electoral college system to elect statewide office holders. I don't really understand that. Ian Milheiser says the legal term of art for this proposal is cheating. He's a senior correspondent for Vox. Okay. He's the author of a book called Injustices, the Supreme Court's history of comforting the comfortable and afflicting the afflicted. What a great book title. Sounds like something I should read. 4 New York police officers have died by suicide in the last 3 weeks. Could be people who are afraid. This is an article I was reading, and I'll describe it to you tomorrow and put it up on the Discord group that I've started, Why Facts Don't Change Our Minds. And it's a lot of reporting on studies carried out by psychologists at universities that illustrate when people have formed an impression about something, even if you inform them that they were given wrong data, fabricated data, just to elicit a reaction from them for the purpose of the study, they'll still, when surveyed, show a strong adherence to their original impression. And they've suggested that the biological evolutionary reason for this is to mitigate against the tendency of individuals to coast on the efforts of the group, so loafing and benefiting from others' hard work. So for that end, they say people just often back themselves. I can't remember the logic of it, but I know when I've had some more sleep, I'll return to this point and see if by the end of the article it comes up with any solutions for trying to work around confirmation bias. But I know one solution that I've seen proposed before, and I massively stand by, is the appeal to demographic equivalence. So people who look like you, who sound like you, who reason like you. And one man carried out this experiment with Twitter profiles, which he manipulated whilst sharing opinions. And when he appeared to be a white male, Twitter profile picture, a lot of white male accounts agreed with what he was saying. And if he changed it to a woman, there would be more likes from women, etc. There was just more appeal to people who he changed the Twitter account to have a commonality with. And that would comport with what we know about mirror neurons and how we just copy. We copy other people. We're more likely to copy people who look like us because if our circumstances are the same, then it's more likely to work out if we adopt the same strategy that we see other people adopt. I have a Twitter account that is davcat43, and my website is davcat43.com. Thank you so much for your question. If you are interested in increasing the reach of this broadcast, I encourage you to retweet it to your Twitter compatriots. And hey, Brian, nice to see you. Yes, you told me the same thing. I remember that you have anecdotal data because you changed your profile picture to a white girl and then everything changed. But in real life, you have black hair and tan skin. Yes. COVID info is now going to the White House and to a health group started by Peter Thiel, Thiel, who's a early founder of Facebook and who's conservative and very unprincipled. Become a patriot? What's that in relation to? Not singing any Hamilton songs today, if you missed me. Governor Brian Kemp bans Georgia cities and counties from mandating masks and face coverings. That's quite distressing news because it's such a lack of concern for the health and well-being of Americans. How come Stacey Abrams is trending? Has she condemned Brian Kemp? One hopes so. But yes, mandating or making a law that all counties cannot mandate mask orders. It's so bad. It's so harmful. So many people lose their lives as a consequence. So she's trending because perhaps she said that Brian Kemp has demonstrated that he has absolutely no competency in this process. It's true, it took him a really long time to announce, we've just noticed that we've just found out that you can carry the virus asymptomatically, and that had been known for months. So to display an ignorance of that, or to pretend to be ignorant of that, is very harmful, because that's a key message to communicate to the public, that you stay home not because you're sick, you stay home because you can still transmit the virus to others even when you feel fine. You may be asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic. Maybe you'll feel worse later, or maybe you'll never feel bad. Yep, Stacey Abrams wouldn't have killed a bunch of people to prove her fealty to Donald Trump. Good point. I retweeted it. We're going to watch this ad, which is an ad called Not My Child. It's trending number 3 in the United States, which is good because it's a message worth amplification. Twitter keeps putting a warning on his videos. Not fair. Okay.
On earth than the one between a mother and her child.
Hang on, I'll stop.
You carried your child. There's no greater bond on earth than the one between a mother and her child. You carried your child inside your body for 9 months. You were there when your child took their first breath. You have loved, cared for, nurtured, developed, and protected your child. Their first steps, their first words.
Oh my God!
Their first everything in life was with you. Now Donald Trump wants you to abandon your most primal and powerful motherly instinct to protect your child. Trump and Betsy DeVos have said children don't get coronavirus. Tell that to the families of these children who all died from coronavirus.
Can you assure students, teachers, parents that they will not get coronavirus because they're going back to school?
Well, the key is that kids have to get back to school.
There are more than 140,000 dead Americans. Classrooms will become petri dishes.
The CDC has guidelines about the opening of schools at various stages of those checkpoints.
We don't want CDC guidance to be a reason why people don't reopen their schools.
What about the teachers, the janitors, the security guards? It could happen from anyone in the school, anywhere in the school. The classroom, the cafeteria, the bathroom, the locker room, the gym. All it takes is one person to be sick, just one to infect your child. Trump is so desperate to get reelected that he's threatening to defund schools for simply trying to protect their students.
So we're very much going to put pressure on governors and everybody else to open the schools.
He wants to sacrifice your child so the country can appear to be open and working. But it's not working. It's getting worse. Donald Trump wants you to hurt your own child for his reelection. Are you prepared to do that? This isn't a choice between Trump or Biden. This is a choice between Trump and your child.
It's a powerful ad. It's powerful. They have they have visualized the coronavirus floating through the empty seats around at a Trump rally. They have shown children in schools and how difficult it would be to socially distance. I mean, there's lots of places where schools are reopening around the world, and it's because the case rate is lower than it is in the United States. So people are still trying to take precautions. Children in a lot of states, in a lot of nations, are wearing masks. So in Taiwan, children have been mandated to wear masks, I think, since potentially January. Could be February. So yes, that was an ad. I found someone who's called Malia who said, just came across my channel. Hey, fellow Australian. Yesterday, people were protesting the thought of masks for school this year. I think as cases increase, more and more people will be very against the idea of going back to school. Are you talking about Florida? Because yes, there's a lot of American states that qualify as having the highest numbers of new cases in the world in competition with other nations. These are just American states. And normally that type of exceptionalism has been reserved for economic success. So California being the 5th largest economy in the world in comparison with countries, but California's a state. So the Californian economy does a lot to prop up America overall, to prop up federal government coffers, to prop up less productive states, primarily red states. As rude as they are about blue states, most of them are financially dependent on tax dollars extracted from blue states. And if southern and red states were more productive and less nostalgic for the profitability of slavery and more committed to the profitability of embracing migration and embracing the attendant virtues of higher educational standards and higher levels of successful entrepreneurship that attend welcoming migrants to your state, then southern red states would be more self-supporting and less reliant on blue tax dollars. Utah. So Utah is the 29th highest case in the world. I thought it might be Florida because, well, Florida is probably higher than 29th, isn't it? You've messaged me an article. I read an awesome article today, very moving, about, I'm going to find it for you, about a Black doctor called Michelle Harper. She wrote a biography of her experience. Box. Michelle Harper. She wrote a book called The Beauty in Breaking. Good title. Oh, she's beautiful as well. Wow. Okay, I'll just show you what I'm looking at so that I'm not watching beautiful people all by myself. This is the author. This is the book cover, The Beauty in Breaking, a Memoir. And now I'm just trying to find the article. I can just describe for you what I read, the excerpt, in which she described what happened to her in an emergency room when police officers brought a young man in and said that he needed to be medically examined, that they'd seen him ingesting drugs, and he didn't consent to the medical exam. And Michelle Harper, Dr. Harper, did not give the exam. And her white register, so subordinate trainee doctor, who she was in charge of, challenged her decision and said, I've seen other doctors forcibly give people exams. Why aren't you doing it? I've called the ethics line. And Dr. Harper explained that we live in a nation of laws and it's against the law to impose medical treatment on someone that they don't accept. And even a Jehovah's Witness is allowed to bleed out if they aren't consenting adults and they don't consent to a blood transfusion. There's all manner of decisions that people as consenting adults are allowed to consent to or refuse. So she treated the young man with dignity and she did not force the medical exam on him, and the ethics hotline for doctors ended up responding that nope, it's fine and legal for the doctor to refuse to give an examination to an adult person who's refusing one, even when when police officers are saying, no, we want to arrest this young man, you have to examine him for us. And how her experience was just colored by perceiving that there was a privilege at work that drove the young white female registered trainee doctor to challenge the authority of the more senior black female doctor into complying with police officers, even when to do so was breaking American law. I know where I can find it. It was a Medium article. Now I've got it. Okay. One of the more powerful things I've read recently. It's illegal to treat someone without consent, but that doesn't stop some of my colleagues. There's so many areas to look for complicity in, and to remember that oppression always has as a factor the compliance of people who accept it. So people had to cooperate with Hitler in order to enforce the inhumane actions of that government. People had to cooperate with Trumpism to enforce what was done at the border, to enforce the forcible separation of children from their parents and the subsequent imprisonment of those effectively kidnapped children. And even now, if Trump removes the data from public access, there are people complying with him to do that. And you can comply quietly, or you can whistleblow, or you can protest noisily or loudly, and you can use whatever freedoms you have at your disposal. And even if you're on your knees, you fight. From the position you're in, you fight on your knees. So yes, to look at some more of this article, scroll down because she goes into some analysis of the factors at play. So the officer, the charge nurse, and the resident doctor all stared at her when she refused to examine the non-consenting man. Then they began to explain to me that other physicians had forced such exams on patients. I'm sorry to hear that, I told them. I'm sorry to hear that there are doctors who will break the law for this reason. I am not one of those physicians. Lauren turned around and went back to her desk. She could overhear nurses on both sides of the department debating the ethics of my letting the prisoner go. She heard them telling stories of how common it was common hospital practice to make an intervention of how just the other day, Dr. Brisbane, another ER doctor, had placed a nasogastric tube up the nose of a patient, down the back of his throat, and into his stomach to pump gallons of Golightly, the fluid used in a colonoscopy prep, into his gut until his stool ran clear to remove the alleged drugs from his system. So it wasn't drugs that he said he had taken, it was drugs that police officers alleged he'd taken. And we are all, I think, a lot less trusting of the statements and assertions of police officers in the advent, not just of the actions of the police officers involved in George Floyd's torture and murder, but the police report that they submitted after George Floyd's torture and murder, in which they asserted that Floyd had been uncooperative and that Floyd had just had a medical incident. So a Latina nurse chimed in, yes, well, Dr. Harper is correct. You cannot force an examination on anyone just because the police or family member or any third party happens to request it. We need to treat people like human beings. I'm tired of people treating certain people like animals. There you go. So Lauren was antagonistic and said, I'm waiting for a callback from hospital ethics. I told them the whole case because I don't think he can refuse an exam and medical interventions. We really need the ethics board in on this one if you're going to let him go. I've worked with Dr. Linden and Dr. Jacobson on similar cases, and we just tell the prisoners what we are going to do. They don't have a choice. I don't understand what you're doing. Her tone was more indictment than question. It was a tone she used to assert that she knew more than I did, and for reasons she would never have dared articulate. Yes, and that's part of the microaggression, that it's difficult for people to explain that they can sense that they're being discriminated against. But for people who look for proof, it's more difficult to be forthcoming of proof for people who are predisposed to not accept your proof. But that's why somebody writing a book like this and having an extract published like this is really important, so that we get more of the context, so that it helps feed a healthy pattern of trust but verify. Trust but verify. And also perhaps question whom you trust and whom you distrust. Here's the quote. Top highlight. After all, willingly or not, Lauren had donned the cloak of white male privilege, and it fit snugly over her own skin. After all, this is the only way oppression can function. It requires the buy-in of a certain percentage of those it actively oppresses in order to pit those groups of subjugated people against each other. And that's my little pep talk for the day. I haven't seen any comments for a long time. Is there? We still have 6 people listening, but I guess it's just less stuff to talk about for people. But that passage is very important to me. Oppression can only function if there is buy-in, and that's an important point about the way that the Trump administration functions. We can't restrict ourselves to snark or self-fulfilling prophecies. Our reaction can't just be, oh yes, well, we predicted everything would go terrible. It's incumbent upon us as people with any conscience or sense of decency to still keep advocating for positive outcomes, to still keep pushing for there to be public health campaigns, national testing campaigns, national efforts to step up the production of needed personal protective equipment for health professionals, for nursing staff, and for individuals in the community. Trump still needs to evoke the Defense Production Act, and I'm sure he's not inclined to do it, and he seems to be very stoutly opposed to doing that. In some ways because he avoids the humiliation of changing tack, of doing something he didn't do before. That's about saving face. So if you change the balance of the dynamics of that situation and make it more embarrassing for him to not taking some course of action, then sometimes he changes tack. That's really important to think about, because when we undervalue our own power, then that's when we have buy-in, passive buy-in to oppression. And that is the straw that helps oppression work. Whereas the minimal impact that we have as individuals can amplify and build momentum and account for something. And nobody likes casting away their labor to pursuits that are misguided or unpopular. But if you abandon your own power to build popularity, and if you abandon the pursuit of a skill set that will help you in your endeavors, then the bad news is that you are contributing to oppression and you are contributing to harm. So let's not do that. Let's be resolved to keep brainstorming and thinking for ways to increase our power for good, to latch on to other people's efforts, to amplify those efforts and build on those efforts and support those efforts to do good. Twitter has many disadvantages, but it is still a hub for international communication. And if you're watching me, then you're on that website. It uses up a lot of carbon budget to store so much information. And maybe we have to look at ways of finding more efficient ways to use the internet. But also, we have to do our very best to use this ability to communicate for good. So I will say thank you again. I'll see if there's any final ads that I want to show you. So we've seen Nancy Pelosi and we've seen the Not My Child ad. This is not bad.
For every American to follow over the next 15 days as we combat the virus. The guidelines are...
The lead into this ad is to say this is the last time they even pretended to have a plan. When it was in March and they were like, yes, we'll have this very limited proposal to do 15 days of concerted action. Dr. Fauci backed that one. I would like it if Dr. Fauci did more to reject the inaction. I would like Dr. Fauci to be more upset that he is still a significant scientific advisor at a time when science has been so disparaged and not followed. But it would be kind of good if he resigned as a rebuke to the Trump administration. But he keeps saying that he gets along well with the president. He keeps hoping, I guess, that he can do more good whilst they pretend to trust him. But they're breaking that bargain. They're still undermining Fauci and writing. Trump is encouraging Peter Navarro to write op-eds about him. And the White House gave out a list of all the times Fauci had been wrong as the scientific understanding of COVID-19 progressed and developed. It's a new pandemic. It's a novel coronavirus.
15-day trial guideline.
This guidance for the next 15 days, what you can do over the next 15 days to prevent the spread.
Our 15 days to stop the spread initiative.
And if everybody in America does what we ask for over the next 15 days, we will see a dramatic difference.
Much of what we're talking about is for the next 15 days.
15 days to slow the spread. That was in March. That was 4 months ago. And it was quite possibly the only time that this White House has been united behind a single message about how to address what is now an out-of-control crisis. They made 15 days to slow the spread PowerPoint presentations. They made PSAs that ran online. They printed out the guidelines on paper to wave around at task force briefings and in TV interviews. Despite the vigor with which White House officials shook those guidelines in the air, the spread was not slowed in 15 days. And they did not stay committed to that single, consistent message about how to address the coronavirus. Ever since then, the administration's approach to the pandemic has felt more like a bar fight than a cogent policy.
Yes. Yes, Persian Chick, I did see the briefing where it was Jim Acosta asked Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany, why are they undermining Dr. Fauci anonymously? Why were they submitting to reporters an anonymous statement, compilation of all the times he'd been wrong? And McEnany said that it was in response to a question blah, blah lies. And yeah, it's good to challenge them, but the reason why they're going out of their way to undermine him behind their back is because it eats into public support if you too blatantly contradict and undermine the preeminent authority on infectious diseases, not only in America, but around the world, really. But they're quite happy to anonymously or indirectly or covertly undermine Dr. Fauci to try and blame him, because blame and boast is what is the bread and butter of fascistic totalitarian governments. They don't govern for efficacy. They govern to continue their emotional hold over the gullible. That's par for the course. And our goal is to still reduce that gullibility by exposing people to accounts from people who look and sound like them. So we keep sharing those clips of those testimonials from former Republicans or Republican voters who announced their intention of voting for Biden and the problems they have with Trump, just in the hope of voters who are fence sitters, because 27% approximately of Americans are just flat outright crazy. And the strength of their confirmation bias is not easily challenged. So you use your energy well, and you share converted Republican voter testimonials in the hope that conservative-leaning independents see it and find something that resonates with them and change their mind and support Biden. Or at the very least, have a reduction in their compulsion to vote for Trump. Yes, Dr. Fauci was not the one who blatantly misrepresented the situation. And Dr. Fauci was never the one getting the classified briefings initially as well. That was in Trump's daily intelligence briefings in January and February, that he was being told information that the rest of the world didn't have, because he's ostensibly the leader of the free world. So all of their criticisms are just all to deflect from the fact that it's not a state problem, it's a national crisis. And Trump has not initiated a national response, that all of your federal tax dollars should be used to pay for something that will safeguard all of you and safeguard your economy by addressing the problems that result from the coronavirus. And the economy hasn't been hurt by the shutdowns, because Sweden also has lost a lot in its projected GDP for the year. And Sweden didn't lock down. It's just harms to businesses occur when people are afraid because of an evident pandemic. People are afraid because of the visibility of widespread death, and then the attendant widespread economic devastation that comes from people just trying to stay safe. In any war, the first casualties are the truth. Yes, and Trump launched a war against reality, as all totalitarian leaders do, when he told people that the press was fake news. And he built on decades worth of public brainwashing by right-wing media organizations that confect outrage, that manipulate public sentiment into supporting policies and politicians who act against their interests. So I'd best go to bed. I will thank you all. Yes, the exclamation marks, I hope, are just a reflection of your resolve to do something, because yes, the president was impeached because he's a criminal and he breaks American campaigns finance laws and he extorts foreign governments to try to ensure their cooperation and contribution to smear campaigns on his political rivals, which is highly illegal and highly unprincipled. And the Republican Party is all for it in the main. because they've abandoned principles in the naked pursuit of power. And we know that, but moving forward, what are we going to do about it? So yes, thank you. Herd immunity doesn't really work. The vaccines may not come to pass. If the Oxford vaccine is successful, it might still, I mean, in the monkeys trial, it didn't make it worse, and that was a big win. And it gave some protective effect. The monkeys that were exposed to heavy doses of the COVID-19 virus, they contracted the disease, but they didn't have symptoms. So they were fine, but they could still transmit the virus, which is still problematic, actually. Very problematic. So my husband agrees. He thinks that the virus is going to be with us for a while. Flu vaccines don't have long-term mitigation either. And yep. And some flu vaccines have multifactorial impacts on the flu, whereas a lot of the attempts to manufacture a COVID-19 vaccination are just addressing one element of the virus. So hydroxychloroquine is not a miracle cure. The knickers of the far right are all in a knot saying that Democrats are deliberately trying to sabotage hydroxychloroquine just to hurt Trump's re-election prospects. Look, it's very easy to use partisanship to build on people's inherent intellectual inferiority complexes that makes them gravitate towards very confected conspiracy theories, because then they have inner secret knowledge that even the doctors don't know about, and the accountants don't know about, and the people with higher salaries than them who think they're so good with their educations. They don't know this secret information. It's very attractive. It's very reinforcing. It's like an addiction for lots of people. I know Oxford has the Oxford vaccine is the most promising, but it's still, the monkeys that had that vaccine still carried it. They didn't suffer from the symptoms, but they were still capable of transmitting the virus. So yes, it would lessen the impact, but it wouldn't be a panacea to all of the attendant problems of a global pandemic that is raging out of control in many places around the world, mostly in places that are underdeveloped, in less industrialized, less wealthy societies, with the exception of America and Brazil, both of which are being run into the ground by their ruinously destructive totalitarian style presidents. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Malia. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Persian Chick. Thank you, Brian. Take care, everybody. I'll talk to you again sooner rather than later, with any luck. And as always, if you have any suggestions on the broadcast, the structure, things to include, useful articles that you'd like to share with me, feel free to direct message me on Twitter. I don't feel oppressed by that. If I don't have time to read your messages, I won't. But if I do, I will. Thank you. Bye. Yes, good job, Scotland. Good job, lots of European countries that are reopening because they have the low rates to validate that approach. Good luck to everybody. We're still going to be going through cycles of opening and reopening and closing again, I think, for a while. But well done to those. Countries that have successfully not just flattened the curve, but bent it down towards zero. What does this say? Goid. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.